And welcome back, everyone. We brought you the president live from Hartford, who just moments ago was talking to an audience that needs no reminding about the tragedy of guns. In fact, he talked on the Hartford campus, where he noted alumni who either lost children or died that day as educators in the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Now, as this debate will now move to Washington, a key part of it will be the voices of those Newtown parents who have paid, as we know, the ultimate sacrifice for the gaps in gun laws, or for just the reality of some of the violence, depending on your perspective on this. But either way, the president will take many of them, as I said, with him to Washington tonight on Air Force One to meet with lawmakers in the halls of Congress tomorrow. But last night, a group of some of those Newtown parents, they sat down with Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes. And I want to share a couple of the stories with you, including their role in helping push through Connecticut's tough new gun laws last week. They were in the Capitol showing pictures of their children, kids lost in the Sandy Hook massacre, to lawmakers before the vote.
Why the photographs?
They need to not just look us in the eyes, but look our children and the lost ones and see those faces, see what's gone, and remember, this isn't just about political parties, this isn't just about careers, this is about people, and this is about making change to save people. And it's important to remember the people that you are doing this for.
And I want to play another couple sound bites from a few more Newtown parents. The first ones you're going to hear from are Francine Wheeler and Jimmy Green. And then also I want you to hear from David Wheeler. Here again, parents talking about why they have continued to fight for this, not just in Connecticut, but also while they'll be in Washington, and what they want from our leaders.
4 months to them, it feels like it just happened a moment ago.
To you.
And yet, it's been years since I've seen my son. Okay? So we're not going anywhere. We're here, and we're going to be here.
We don't get to move on. We don't have the benefit of turning the page to another piece of legislation and having another debate and playing politics the same way we've been doing. We don't have that benefit. We're going to live with this for the rest of our lives. So our legislators need to hear us.
I would like every parent in this country, that's 150 million people, I would like them to look in the mirror, and that's not a figure of speech, Scott. I mean, literally find a mirror in your house and look in it and look in your eyes and say, this will never happen to me. This will never happen in my school. This will never happen in my community. And see if you actually believe that. And if there is a shadow, the slightest shadow of doubt about what you've said, think about what you can do to change that in your house, in your community, in your school, in your country. Because we have an obligation to our children to do this for them. It's going to happen again. It is going to happen again. And every time, you know, it's somebody else's school, it's somebody else's town, it's somebody else's community, until one day you wake up and it's not.
You know, Dominic, I sat last night in my kitchen watching this, and we'll play some more sound, just heart-wrenching personal stuff as to what their lives have been like since that tragedy. But you say to yourself, you know what? You can't say it couldn't be your school. And I think part of this whole political debate that's hard is, Richard brings up fair points. Everybody can bring up a fair point about why the legislation isn't perfect, or why it wouldn't have stopped X, or why Z could have happened even if you had it in place, or whatever else. But 3,500 Americans have died since Newtown at the end of a gun, for all different reasons: robbery, suicides, lunatic going into a building. But they're still dying in unbelievable numbers every year. And the frustrating part, and I talk to people about it, is it shouldn't be so hard to do something about it. But that's the frustration a lot of people feel, that Washington plays politics when more and more people die every day. And it's a hard thing to argue with them. They may be a little oversimplified, but you know what? We shouldn't be getting to be the middle of April and not a single thing's been done in Washington. It's really, you hear those parents and you get as sad as, you also get mad for them.
It's heartbreaking. And I'm not going to pull punches right now, with all due respect to my friend. The Republican Party needs to be ashamed of itself. It needs to stop the nonsense. The Republican Party, every member of the Republican Party that's in public office should be made to watch that 60-minute segment. And that's why it's a great idea that those parents are going down there. They have become the party, this is why they're losing so badly throughout the country. They have become the party of obstructionists. And yes, there are a few Democrats that are in line with them, up for re-election and so on. But at some point, it's not about an election. At some point, it has to be about something that's real. It has to be about the children. And frankly, I'm sick of listening to the excuses. Excuse after excuse after excuse until it hits one of their children. Then it's time on gay marriage. Or, you know, I'm against gay marriage. Then he finds out, the governor of Ohio, that his son is gay. I support gay marriage. What type of politics is that? What type of substance is that?
You know, it's interesting. There was a section of that report last night, and I got as emotional as you did watching the piece. But as the lawmakers in Connecticut were filing past the Newtown parents, and the parents were showing the photos, you had several who were like, "Oh no, I've seen this. I've got this information." They didn't realize at the time that they were Newtown parents and that they were showing photos of their dead kids. And once they did realize that, they came back and they stopped and they looked. But that speaks to what Dominic was saying. When these issues are abstractions, it's easy to get bogged down in, oh, it's a tax or it's an assault on the Second Amendment or whatever the case may be. But it's not an abstraction to millions of Americans who've been personally affected by gun violence one way or another. Whether, even if it's the other end of it, if it's they've got loved ones sitting in jail.
You know, Richard, to Andrew's point, and really Dominic's point, I get it. There's parts of it, the legislation, that lawmakers didn't like. But what, to me, I found problematic is, I haven't seen one national Republican say, okay, here's my version. This is what I want to do to stop the next Newtown. Other than, let's arm the lunch lady, or more guns. It's not the guns, it's the people, that tired thing, right? When I see somebody stand up and come forward and say, this is my proposal, other than, let's put more guns in schools. I want to stop the following people. We're going to put a background check, and this is what we're going to do. Instead, the knee-jerk thing is, oh, it's the video games, or oh, let's blame media, or you know what, it's the mental health system, but yet let's cut funding here for all the programs. You're in an impossible situation tonight, and I'm not trying to pin everything on you on this, but I think the Republican Party, and there's been members who've said, okay, I'll meet you halfway, and then all the gun rights groups threaten them. You got a primary here, pal, waiting for you, if you so much as meet them in the middle here and try and push this thing through. We've seen chapter and verse of this. The GOP can do better than this on this one.
To your first point, there are Republicans, including Senator McCain, who would like to see some legislation passed. Let's not lose focus and sight of what we're talking about here. We're talking about acts of terrorists from Virginia Tech to Newtown that have taken place because of criminals.
It's more than that, though. It's not just the mass shootings at the schools. It's how many people, bad people, are getting their hands on guns, you know, like it's buying a pack of gum at a store.
I agree, and we need to close those loopholes that allow criminals and people with mental illnesses, we have to not allow them to have access to weapons. Whether it's ensuring that the weapons are locked up safely, whether it's ensuring that people with mental illnesses, as in Connecticut, don't have access to these weapons, that's really the focus. Unfortunately, the legislation in Washington that the Democrats should be ashamed of and pushing forward is basically to curtail the Second Amendment.
Well, what did the Republicans do? What was their answer to this?
I think their answer is that this legislation is not going to work as is, and so it should not be passed as is, and I agree with that. There's too much in that legislation that simply does not deal with how to stop these acts of terrorism.
You believe that. You can't tell me, after just watching those parents, you can't tell me in your heart that that's what you really believe.
In the 1940s, after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, emotionally, Americans and the Democratic president, in turn, basically locked up Japanese Americans. They were Americans, put them in internment camps because of emotions. We can't do that simply because of Newtown, because of emotion. Let's be rational and logical. Let's go after the reason this happened.
Let me give you one other, because you mentioned the reference to terrorism, which is actually an interesting comparison, but after 9/11, we made sure that you couldn't bring a box cutter on the plane. You couldn't bring the weapons of that terrorism
Well, they're
to the
actually
place.
considering now box cutters now,
But to
again.
the place where you would engage in the act of terrorism. How is this different? How is trying to put a background check different? It's keeping the weapon out of the hand of the terrorist.
Right. And the background check is fine. The school, remember, the name of this bill is School Safety, Safer Communities and Safe Schools Act, okay? Which the Safe Schools provide grants, money to schools and campuses for security and surveillance. That's important. Have that with universal background checks. That's fine. That deserves a vote. A gun tax, a felony, National Registry? National Registry is on your way. Once you register your weapon, you're on your way to saying, I want to take your weapon now.
Why? Says who?
Any country, if you look in the
Hey, I
past,
can register my car.
that's fine.
What, is the government
And
going
you
to
know
go
what? And I
like
can
carjack me at night? I mean, what's...
And you
why
register your
shouldn't
car.
I register it?
You register a car, and guess what? You can take that. It's, first of all, that's a privilege. Okay, this is the attorney in me. That's a privilege. It's not a constitutional right like the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is a
Do
constitutional
you
right.
have a right to have a bazooka? What's your interpretation of that?
I don't think anybody has a bazooka.
No, what's your interpretation of that?
Of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms?
Do you have a right to own a bazooka?
I don't think. I
So
think that's a
there are
little
limits.
extreme.
There are
That's a little
limits to
extreme.
freedoms in
Yes,
this
there
country,
are.
okay?
Yeah, I agree
and the
with you
limit to
wholeheartedly.
freedoms is there should be a responsibility attached, okay?
And that's what I'm talking about, responsibility. That legislation that we're talking about in Washington is not talking about responsibility.
We're going to jump to a break here. When we come back, guns and gun safety, it's also the focus of one of our questions this evening. If Congress doesn't get anything done, a universal background check like we're talking about here, who will you blame, or won't you blame anyone? Go to our Facebook page right now and send in your comments on Twitter and keep this debate going. We're going to keep this conversation going as well on the other side.